why does HIIT burn so much fat? What mechanically or chemically is going on that is so different from continuous cardio? Well, let's break it down. It's pretty simple in some ways, but if you start diving into how energy is manufactured and how we resynthesize ATP, it actually gets a little bit more in depth than people on the internet might typically lead you to believe. So let's break it down. Hey, after this video, check out our sponsor, Thrive Market. Okay, so if you are doing anything to sort of change your life, exercise, eating, whatever, Thrive Market just makes it super easy. They're an online grocery store, membership-based grocery store. But the cool thing is, it's just the filtering system is amazing. So if I wanted to get baked goods that were also keto-friendly, that were also vegan, that were also paleo, I can check boxes, filter down to exactly what I want, so I can get exactly the food I'm looking for. I've been using it for 3-4 years now. They've been a sponsor on this channel for that same amount of time. My pantry is pretty much stocked with Thrive goods, and then it just shows up at my doorstep in a couple days. So there's a link down below, saves you 25% off your first order, which is amazing. And you get a free gift. So you gotta use that link down below. And a big thank you to Thrive Market for allowing us to create this awesome content. So I'm not here to just say that HIIT is better than continuous. As a matter of fact, for a lot of reasons, I like continuous. If you can push continuous cardio like at a higher intensity, like 80%, 75, 80%, you actually will get more of a fat burning response than you would from HIIT. But if you're comparing high intensity interval training to longer duration, low intensity steady state, like just walking on a treadmill or walking on a treadmill on incline or going for a walk, HIIT's gonna get you there faster. It's gonna get you to your results faster. That being said, I'm someone that walks 20,000 steps a day because I want to. So I love that walking contributes to so much of my overall fat burn. And I don't want to make this video about how HIIT is so much better. But if you look at apples to apples, the HIIT data versus the continuous data, a lot of times you do see that HIIT is better at burning fat. So let's take a look at a study that was published in the journal Obesity. I mean, we can't just cherry pick one study, but this one's pretty interesting. Okay, it took a look at 15 weeks of HIIT. Okay, so 15 weeks of 3 times per week, 20-minute HIIT sessions. Okay, 8-second sprints followed by 12-second recovery. 8-second sprint, 12-second recovery for 20 minutes. That's pretty intense. That's like intense sprinting. And the way that HIIT should be, it shouldn't just be like going for 1 minute on, 1 minute off. It should be an all-out sprint and then a recovery. All-out sprint, so you get that heightened stress response, okay? Then it compared this to moderate intensity continuous training. Okay, in this particular case, it was about 60% of their VO2 max, which is actually decent. Not super high, but you know, it's something that you could hold for a little while. It's still getting your heart rate up pretty good. Well, what were the differences? What were the results? Well, the HIIT group lost significantly more subcutaneous fat, okay, and they had quite a reduction in their abdominal fat. Well, why is that? Well, first off, when you're doing HIIT and you're really pushing that stress response, like you're really pushing it heavy, you have a lot more in the way of what are called catecholamines, like norepinephrine, epinephrine, and these things, well, they are stress, I guess we could call them hormones, not really, but what they do is they bind to beta adrenergic receptors. And we have a lot of what are called beta adrenergic receptors in our visceral fat and our subcutaneous abdominal fat. So when we have that stress response and we're burning fat, the fat is more likely to be burned from the midsection, which is hugely beneficial. So a lot of times when people are just kind of lifting up their shirt and looking at their stomach and using that as a gauge for fat loss, they see it quicker with HIIT, so they automatically assume it's burning more fat, when it probably is, but it's definitely reflected more in the abdomen. So there's a few things with HIIT, okay? Obviously you have the increase in post-exercise oxygen consumption, but again, I will make the solid argument that if I go out for a run at a high intensity for 30 minutes, my post-exercise oxygen consumption is still pretty intense. I'm in oxygen debt for a while, so I kind of want to throw that one away. But what I will say is if you are training at a high intensity with HIIT, you're less likely to have a high appetite. After I go for a long run, I actually am very hungry. But after I do HIIT, I don't really feel like eating. And if you start noticing that, it's a typical response because, well, epinephrine, norepinephrine, adrenaline, yeah, those are stress responses, fight or flight. You don't really want to eat with that. But the piece that I think is the most important that people don't always look at is when you look at the hard data, when you look at blood that is pulled, you see that there is more glycerol in people that are doing HIIT. Well, what does that mean? Well, glycerol is what's called a fatty acid backbone. Okay, so when we start burning fat for fuel, we have what's called a triglyceride, this storage form of fat. Triglycerides stored in our tissue. So when a triglyceride gets liberated, a triglyceride is a glycerol molecule with 3 fatty acids bound to it, triglyceride. So when it gets liberated, the fatty acids are cleaved off, and those fatty acids go to the cell and get burned for fuel, okay? Well, what are you left with? You're left with glycerol. Now that glycerol can go through and trigger gluconeogenesis, it can do all kinds of things, but that glycerol, when measured, you see, oh, well, that's an indicator that fat is being burned. If there's more glycerol in the blood with HIIT than there is with continuous training, that's a pretty clear indicator that the body has been liberating fats and using the fatty acids, and you're left with glycerol. So that's a very clear indicator. Well, what's going on? Well, towards the end of high-intensity interval training, it has been demonstrated that anaerobic glycolysis becomes inhibited. So what that means is the typical process of using carbs, whether they're in your bloodstream or in their storage form of glycogen in your liver, they do not get used as well towards the end. Anaerobic glycolysis becomes inhibited. So what happens is your body starts relying on something called PCR degradation. That's not as important, but in addition to PCR degradation, it also starts pulling from what are called intramyocellular triglycerides. Well, triglycerides we know are the storage form of fat. Intramyocellular means inside the muscle tissue. So these are triglycerides that are inside the muscle tissue that are getting liberated. So we are, in fact, moving over to using fats as a fuel source. So that is really the solid case for high-intensity interval training being better for subcutaneous fat reduction, specifically when you're starting to look at the abdominal region. Again, I cannot overemphasize that you should cross-train and switch things up, because the more that you do continuous training, the more that you can push the range in which your body uses fat for fuel. So I think a combination of the two is phenomenal. 30, 40-minute continuous training at like a 60 to 75% max heart rate range, combined with other days that you're doing HIIT with 8-second sprints and 12-second recovery. That combination is everything. Don't be a one-trick pony. Continuous training to build the stamina, intense training to burn the fat, specifically in the abdomen. I'll see you tomorrow.